So welcome, and what an honor. Thank you, Stephanie, for inviting me to moderate this very interesting panel discussion on hybrid architectures, art and design. I've always been a huge fan of Cui Jie's work, so a pleasure to be with you here in Hong Kong. And you've created these extraordinary paintings that delve with heterogeneous perspectives, depicting cities and how you reflect on architecture and art, its role throughout history. So really excited to be with you. And of course, Kulapat in this beautiful, shocking red, colorful personality, and just an extremely fantastic visionary architect. Again, I know you're originally from Bangkok, but you also have been traveling around the world, seeing the world through the lens as an architect and designer, and have been kind of driving a lot of design hybridities in terms of how architecture can influence the public and how the public can also influence the transformation of architecture. So real honor to be with all of you. Today's topic is, I would say, both a way to unpack how art and design and architecture's relationship create a conversation around cities, publicness, public realm. But at the same time, what can an artist learn from architecture as a discipline, and how an architect can also shape and create spaces to house art in very unique ways. And thank you to Stephanie also for inviting just a little bit of a background maybe about myself. I'm also trained as an architect, but also now driving a really interesting project as a partner, cultural partner with Art Basel for the first time this year. And very exciting to share a little bit more on that. And our few of the slides, maybe just to give you a question and a background and foreground on this conversation of how I also relate to this interdisciplinary world of architecture and design and the impact it has as a process. We've been around since 2007, 18 years old as a nonprofit, working on producing intersections of multidisciplinary ways to transform public spaces. So a few of these images you see in front of you takes a lot of partnerships and possibilities with local community to give voice for young designers and architects to shape their city. So our Design Trust Foundation started in 2014 out of a registered charity, looking at relationships of heritage, looking at a culture of making, site-specific works relating to buildings. And this one in particular, really exciting 1930s building in Hong Kong that we had a great opportunity to nurture young designers and artists and cultural makers to create new site-specific works. And this is a really exciting kind of way to think about hybridity of the disciplines, but also how art and design can really transform our knowledge and shaping. We've also nurtured quite a few younger designers to have opportunities during Hong Kong Palace Museum's opening a few years back, looking at the role of heritage and zodiac sculptures. And fast forward, what's been, I think, quite exciting for us and relating to Kulapat's work is how can we create dialogue between the public realm and the local community in the cities we operate in. And just passing this 10-year anniversary of the foundation, I invite all of you to come visit us. As a first sort of non-profit architecture design-focused cultural partner of Art Basel, we're really proud to have this great intersection of enlivening this question of hybridity. Right now, just launched yesterday till June 18th, we will be bringing a lot of you and communities together to enjoy a new mini festival, a micro festival. We have 60 artists and architects and designers creating projects in motion, in collaboration, as a reaction to this 19th century building that was originally built in Central District and moved over to Stanley in the south side. So this art of transformation, the theme that we've curated through the foundation, acts as a conversational piece and the backdrop of today's program to see how architects, artists, designers can really work together to transform knowledge, creativity, and also interactions with the larger public. So that's my role. I understand all of you are here to be inspired by Cui Jie's work. She has been looking at issues of identity, incorporating diverse layers of where she's from, Shanghai. So just to share maybe a few minutes first about your background, and then we can also introduce Kulapat's journey and open up the conversations on some case studies they wanted to share with all of you today. So thank you and welcome to Cui Jie, to Hong Kong.
首先很高兴能在这里向
First of all, I am very fortunate to have this opportunity to introduce to you my experience in some of my works that I've done in the past. I am an artist from Shanghai. My main line of work is to use painting as a language to showcase urban planning, city planning, and architecture, and some of the public spaces within a city, and how these spaces form relationship with people. When I was at school, I have not formally learned anything about urban design, urban planning, or architecture. So I am an outsider. I'm an experiencer, I can say, of city design and city spaces. I am Cui Jie. I've probably forgot to mention my own name. Kulapat.
As an architect, visionary architect based in Bangkok and Los Angeles, I know you've also worked a lot with Tada Ando-san, another amazing visionary architect, and maybe share your background and journey.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here with you and with these amazing cultural producers. I was born in Thailand, and I was educated both in Thailand and Japan. I have a PhD in architecture, urban design, and after that, I worked with Tado Ando at his close associate for 8 years, working on many projects all over the country and the world. And I have then settled in America for 20 years between Los Angeles and New York. And I'm very fortunate to be able to work with impactful projects, museums, cultural centers, and others around architecture to host important events that allow culture to be the key of life. And I believe in that power of architecture. So I would love to talk a little bit about that. But before I end, I want to end this little introduction that everything is always hybrid. So I think when we think about hybrid as a new mix, it's actually always been, architecture is hybrid, always been hybrid. Identity has always been hybrid. Life has always been hybrid. So I want to phrase that when we come back to the conversation. So thank you.
That's great. And I think for someone like Kulapat, there's been these small manifestos of expression that you as a multidisciplinary architect operate by. And what I wanted to open also with, there was this really fascinating comment that Kulapat Yantrasast mentioned in one of his manifestos. If you give me 1 second. We haven't actually slept too much lately with building this incredible show in Stanley.
I think yes, we need to give you a rest. Yes.
Give me 1 second. I wanted to open this because it builds a real nice connection with Cui Jie's work. This is what you said. We practice in the gap between pragmatism and poetry, between intelligence and ambition, between experience and imagination. So every site is a question, and every project is an answer. So over from Kulapat to Cui Jie, I think you operate a lot in both artistic critique, painterly expression as an artist, and just beautiful skill as an expression. So what does art learn from architecture? Or how is your artistic practice both acting as an expression of the time during many periods of China's transformation, urbanization? I understand you've created a few slides to talk us through a very specific and incredible case study that represents the era that you are painting within right now. So feel free to choose your slides and talk through your project and this really beautiful project, Species as Gifts.
It's a very short presentation, so I would lay emphasis on my latest solo exhibition held in 2013 in the collaboration at West Bank Museum and Centre Pompidou in Shanghai. And I did a personal project which was about the parks and public spaces in Shanghai and their evolution. And in that history of evolution, these public spaces, the animals and the flora and fauna there, and public sculpture and the names of these parks and how they were exchanged and how they were gifted, and in also the planning and control of humans, they escape from that scheme of control. And so the project has to do with my own individual experience since the lockdown in Shanghai, very intense 3 months. So it's commonly shared by all the inhabitants of Shanghai. So after the 3 months of intensive lockdown, so going outside of your apartment becomes very limited, and any interaction with other people becomes very dangerous. So from a personal experience perspective, I had to actually heal. I had to spiritually or emotionally heal myself. On the other hand, I would also like to see that people who are sharing these experiences, the inhabitants of Shanghai, and how they return to communal life, and how they heal themselves in that process. So I took a year to interview the public spaces people, botanic gardens, zoos, and also I always took the weekends off during off time, how residents of Shanghai and local Shanghainese, how do they exchange and relax in these public spaces, and how they interact with nature in an urban setting. So prior to this, my work was mostly concerned about architecture, built environment, and urban sculpture. So the distinction of this solo exhibition was that I basically moved my gaze to the public spaces, to the parks, and all the public sculpture that I sketched before. They are not oriented towards art, these public sculptures. They are more functional. They appear in a public space such as a square in the middle of it. But such sculptures such as what you see in this presentation, they were originally in the middle of a square, and of course due to the shifts of these of the city itself, and the socialist and realist sculptures were no longer needed in the center of the city, so they were moved and relocated to the zoos and botanic gardens. So for me, it's like they are in retirement, in a sense, and then obviously they sort of interact in a new way with the nature in the setting, in the urban setting, so they sort of gain a second life, so to speak. So when I was working on this exhibition, and then I had very interesting personal observations. As a native of Shanghai, I would talk to these senior citizens and residents in the park, and towards the very end, upon the completion of this project, and I actually put 7 tables in the exhibition, and they were all sort of covered with archival documents, material that described Shanghai in the 70s and the 80s, and you know, there are pictures from that period of those parks, and also the tickets, publications such as the plans and guides to these parks or zoos or botanic gardens. So the design of the wall was also referenced to one of my favorite parks in Shanghai, Dong'an Park. This process saw me interact with the visitors to these exhibitions. So in this process, quite a lot of old people, they really, really touched me. They would talk to me and said, look, this park, for example, People's Park in the center of Shanghai, or Fuxing Park near the French concession, these were where they actually spend time visiting with their loved ones, with their boyfriend, girlfriend back in the old days. So you could share the experience of these public spaces and what actually the connections that took place in those parks. So the city where I'm born into, sort of, I would develop new ideas and new perspectives on it. Even though I was born in Shanghai, I went to school in Hangzhou. My artistic career started in Beijing, where I stayed for 10 years. So I returned to Shanghai 5 years ago, and immediately was plunged into the depth of corona crisis and the lockdown. So for me personally, the exhibition elicited a lot of memories of my childhood and my responses to the flora and fauna. And I would just take a stroll in the parks with different people, with friends, with curators, including towards the later phase of the exhibition. And also exchanges with the audience members. So during the process, concurrently, I would open up a sort of a Shanghai vegetable garden in front of one of the art museums, and the inhabitants and we would just plant vegetables and harvest them together and share our experience about planting edible vegetables. So for me, this is a very interesting experience. And my exhibitions in London or New York or Beijing, they're completely different from those exhibitions prior to this. That's it.
So the metaphor of the garden, or the kind of liminal public space, became the studio for you, became a space for you to interact with the community. So bringing you as an artist out of their traditional studio into the public space. And this is a very important moment where, as artists or creators or cultural makers, how important that interface is to shape knowledge building and public space. So it will be really exciting after sharing a little bit from Kulapat, that intersection between what ultimately is the practice as whether an architect or an artist, is to transform that human experience. So it's a really beautiful project. Can't wait to share more. But over to you, Kulapat. You've prepared also a few beautiful slides. You have a very long career and also some very important projects of architecture for the Louvre, the new project in Thailand that I think you're allowed to talk about, and also the Metropolitan. So how do you see the transformation of how you as an architect celebrate art? Background, foreground, has anything changed in the last kind of decades of experience that allow you to react to such an important museum project extension?
Well, thank you very much. So I would share 3 projects that I selected that I felt perhaps meet with this conversation. But before that, I would love to perhaps explain my position in my practice. I think Marisa already kindly suggested that, and that's why I'm very interested in Cui Jie's practice of how she really create layers of the visible and invisible, emotional, psychological aspect into her work. One thing that I felt we are somewhat a victim, but also a liberator, is that we no longer have the division of labor, right? We no longer have to be just one thing. We can go back to life as hybrid form of creativity. And I think that when I was studying architecture, this is in the 90s and even early 2000s, architecture, I mean, at the time we were told that architecture should already refer to architecture. Just like painting should be referred to architect. Everything should be self-referencing. Because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to create meanings out of your own discipline. But by listening to Cui Jie, as I just mentioned, she looked for urban design, she looked for community, emotional response to a place, memories, right? This was not something that people did in the 90s or even 2000. We finally opened up our inspiration to something outside of our own discipline. Right? Chefs are now not only just looking at food. Chef is looking at fashion. Architecture is looking at art. Artists is looking at cities. Right? All of these is now something that we finally escape or like transcend the division of labor that was made in the modern civilization and the modernization of our culture. So within that, I think it's important to really. That's why I advocate the idea of hybrid is the norm. We should not think of it as something that's that new. It's actually always been. When you look at someone like Da Vinci, everything is hybrid, from science to art, anatomy, to painting, to sculpture, right? We're now going back to that sense of Renaissance where everything connected. And so with that in mind, I'm very encouraged by this conversation because we now not only can take inspiration from each other, from disciplines, we're also learning so much to be whole again. We were part. We were a very good part, but as part, we like little oranges in some little peel. We need to be a whole aspect. And with that, quickly talk about the projects I prepared to share. So again, I'm very fortunate to work with leading institutions of the world that are interested in this kind of how can we bring a museum back to life. One of the things that I always talk and joke with my staff in the office is like, let's decide the life, not just the form. Architecture like form. Form is sexy, but form is lifeless. Unless you know how to design the life, you're missing the big part of it. So that's part. The Rockefeller Wing right here at the Metropolitan Museum in New York is open in May. So I would love to invite everyone when we come open late May. It's a reconfiguration of around 40,000 square feet of a wing of the Met. Again, this is a project that I shows because I think it's so important to think about museums as a place of empathy. Like what Cui Jie has mentioned in her work, talking to communities, talking to history and memories, right? This is a place, I remember when I was, a young person going to Met for the first time, as a young student, I encounter African art for the first time. I encounter Chinese art for the first time. So this is not just about New Yorker or art lovers. These are encounter of other cultures that allow you to understand your place in the larger world. So that's why museums like this are important to me. The other is a project that we just won a competition last year to redo the new department, which the Louvre just started. This is the Louvre Museum in Paris. It is a new department that talked about the history of the world from Roman to the birth of Judaism, the birth of Christianity, and the birth of Islam. This is basically the world of complexity and contradiction we live in the world today. And so the Louvre, which is, of course, French government part of culture, is talked about. And this is something to learn from having the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, of how we can talk about culture not as West and East and what is separate, how we bring everything together, talking about the flow. So you see within this, our design, you see artworks from late Roman to early Byzantine to even some Judaism art, some part of Islam, around the same time, juxtaposed to each other, and talked about, hey, we all from the same place. We were in the same belief system. We all flowed together, but now we're not. We're actually killing each other because of this belief system. And the artwork has become part of the icons that support either both separation or unity. So I would like us to choose unity. And so that's why these museums are important, in my opinion, to be able to bring a sense of understanding and empathy to all of us. The last project that Marisa mentioned, I didn't show too many of these because there's another session early on that my client, the owner of the museum, has talked about this with Alan Lowe, amazing foundation as well. But this is a big attempt for Bangkok to have a very serious contemporary art museum, which opened in December. Again, the weather is lovely. We just had an earthquake, so hopefully everyone's safe. But in December, hopefully we put our feet back on the ground, and we would love to welcome you to come to this museum. Again, it is a museum designed for art, visual art, but also music, performances, Thai food, anything that deal with the Thai soft power, we want to highlight, but create a sense of harmony and synergy between that art form as well. So this is, again, when you arrive into the Dib Museum, Dib Bangkok, and it's just, another sexy staircase to go from the garage to the museum to the rooftop, which we have the James Sorrell. So thank you for my introduction. Yeah.
It's interesting when you mention the word soft power, and also the power of diplomacy and culture. And it's really nice, the slides of some of our work from our nonprofit foundation is really intriguing to create and craft spaces to bring communities together to learn. I know Cui Jie's work in the past, you did a lot of beautiful paintings that also represent kind of modern China, the 10 great buildings, how Beijing has transformed, and how architecture represents that city of power or hierarchy of power. And Kulapat, your beautiful sculptural work, creating that, you say, flow of connection, and the form itself is still enveloping a process, a journey for people to experience that space and connect. So I know this is a conversation, and although we have slides of some of Design Trust's relationship of Hong Kong public to really transform spaces of cultural tourism for heritage and learning, rediscovering our own city. And I think this is kind of a seminal moment where architecture and buildings have to be enlivened to be learning spaces, to be cultural spaces. So with Cui Jie, I understand from your beautiful project, Species as Gifts, you remarked on how important it was for you to create not just the paintings and the research, but how the strategy of display, learning from the garden, whether it's a borrowed landscape, learning about the design process of framing your paintings, would be fantastic to hear about that process from your viewpoint as an artist, working with the curators, working with the space of the museum, how to frame the experience for the community, the general public, when they saw your exhibition. Did you invite the elderly to see your exhibition? Did you also invite different conversations around your exhibition? I think there's a few slides here. You can share more, and we can have a conversation around that. Yeah. I think there's a few.
Sure.
Let me see. Yes, the one I showed before, this particular image here. That's right. At the time, let me go back to the topic that I will now pick up again, and that is from the parks in Shanghai that I researched in. Let me just go back a couple of slides. Hold on. I can't control the slides, it seems. I used about a year. Right. If I can just stop here, if I can just freeze this particular slide. This is a wall, and it comes from the Dongguan Park of Shanghai, and it is close to the academy, the Art Academy. This is a very small park. It was actually a Qing Dynasty Zhang Xin's private residence, part of that. And after 1949, it became nationalized. It became a nursery for plants. And then in the 80s, it was redeveloped into a park. It became a socialist-themed park. And in that particular process, I find interesting or meaningful is that the perspective had changed from its original private residence garden. It served the nobility at the time. So it was a nobility's perspective. It was a nobility's family's entertainment, very classic kind of garden perspective. And then after the building of the nation, it became a socialist-themed space. It was serving the collective. It was open to the public. And in that process, there were a lot of plants and sculptures in the garden, because originally it was a private residence garden, so the scale was different. So the scale was adjusted. Even the name of the garden or the park was changed. And in Shanghai, as you all know, it has a very rich history, and throughout the eras. At the beginning of this park, it was in the so-called leased areas. And the park was actually in the French zone, so it was not open to the Chinese in the city. So it went through different times and different eras, and the plants were changed in the park. So there were different exchanges and continuous flow and changes in the park itself in various ways. And there were, of course, the human design element in it. But on the other hand, we saw that there were plants that were replaced, and there were some plants that were persisted in the park. I found a book, and it's called The History of Shanghai Gardens and Parks. So it is an almanac, actually, of gardens and parks in Shanghai. So it did not take the human perspective. It took the perspective of the plants in the gardens and parks. Of course, there was the human activity element in it as well. But it's an almanac. So it recorded throughout the times, the years, some of the major events that took place affecting the parks and the gardens. So let's say for 1949, the almanac did not talk about the establishment of New China, the nation. Rather, it talked about a huge storm, a typhoon, and a lot of trees along the bund were destroyed. They fell. And the people's park was actually flooded because of the typhoon. So that was a perspective. And then in the 1970s, there was an elephant in the Shanghai Zoo. It escaped the zoo, but it was electrocuted because it ran into electric wires, so that was sad. So that is the perspective from weather, from the plant's point of view, from the animal's point of view, to describe some of these open spaces, these parks and gardens, some of the changes that they went through. So I have found this particular publication, and based on this almanac and based on these perspectives, I have come up with this project. Of course, there was this human element, this human experience in the transition of the Shanghai parks and gardens as well.
I know, Cui Jie, when we had a pre-panel discussion on Zoom, we talked a lot about how does Kulapat design for artists? How does he create spaces for artists? So I imagine something as powerful as this beautiful exhibition borrowing from Chinese landscape motifs draws you through different perspectives. So, and framing her response to the architecture of Shanghai, the contemporary Shanghai, and the garden as a motif to connect. So Kulapat, responding to some of Cui Jie's very emotional work, very critical work, and bringing it back to you as an architect, how do you even begin? How do you work with your multidisciplinary team members to create spaces for the public and community ahead? Yeah.
Yeah, what I love about Cui Jie's work is that, there's combined the visible and the invisible aspect of cities and memories and other things, right? When you see her installation, it has a sense of memory, a sense of this, almost like a natural history, with or without human involved. And of course, we talked about the symbols of human civilization in terms of architecture, but there's almost like an aura photograph of the building juxtaposed because of the emotion aspect. So I think I really appreciate that, really bringing the energy of the storytelling away from the canvas. Right? It's on the wall, it's on the history. The deeper, the thoughtful rendition allows you to really read. You can read it at one layer, but you can go deeper if you want to know more about that. So I think this is a very interesting way of really putting art into a real experience, which is no longer an object, which is an interesting part. For me, I think we all learn from each other in beautiful way, but we all have also our job to do, right? And I think architecture as an art form, the power is in sheltering, we're in the power of hosting. We should not try to be just sculpture. We're not an object, but throughout the history of architecture, we are the big sister. We host everyone. We host painting, we host sculpture, we host music, we host opera, we host life, we host, all kind of things that happen within architecture. And sometimes architects just want to kind of take an easy job. It's like, well, I don't want to host anymore. I just want to be the center of attention. I want to be the sculptor, right? And that's okay too, but there's a damage and there's a negative that come with it, right? Because you're, as a big sister, your job is to make sure everyone come in, everyone connect, artists, art lovers, poetries, musicians. You create a place everyone feel comfortable, and they can be themselves, and they can really bring out. This happened when you think about what happened, even from an agora in a Greek temple to a cathedral in the Western civilization, in a courtyard, in the gardens, right? So all of these are human-made, and so we are here to make. And once the place is right, everyone rise to the occasion to bring the culture to a high level. So that, for me, is a part of architecture. Because architecture is like a perfect dinner table that everyone come together and they sing their best song. They make the best food, they make the best painting. So that's a potential that we cannot ignore. We cannot just be a window decorator. I mean, a lot of people like to just do that because it's easier. But so we also not a rapper. We're not like a gift rapper, just wrap a building into some beautiful facade, which we can do that too.
I thought you were going to say you're not a rapper, like a music rapper.
No, but I think, but we should bring everything into it.
Yeah.
We should eat the best food. We can look at the best painting. We should listen to the best music. But at the end of the day, we also have a job to do is how can we be the big sister that generous enough to let everyone come in and elevate that game. So that's what architecture, I think, it should do. And within this aspect, I really love what Cui Jie has shown from the West Bank Museum, that, for an artist, more and more, I think there's a big difference between artists and culture producers, right? And sometimes you're like, what is it? Like, there are artists that you almost cannot define the practice as art anymore. Like someone like Ai Weiwei, someone like even Christo, right? Someone that are working like, they're just a different kind of artist, right? So we have to recognize that there's a potential of culture producer. You see many of these, in the art fair when they're trying to kind of off the wall, right? They kind of create environment, they create layers of memories, just like what Cui Jie is doing. So we have to recognize that there's a more interest from the artist's perspective too, to not only create objects, but from object become experience, from experience becoming this really kind of haunting universe of memories and images and things that want to occupy our own being, right? So that's what I read from her work, and I felt like it's such an exciting time if we let art do what it could do best, which is to really become our psyche, our aura photograph of who we are. Yes.
I think also what's interesting that's also missing from maybe this conversation today, what we can quickly touch upon, is the role of the kind of patron, the commissioner, or the government civic leader that appoints, for example, competitions that allow you to have that voice, that process, or that civicness. And I'm actually interested because from also our foundation side, it took us about 4.5 years and to launch these revitalization of these pocket parks in Hong Kong. And by the act of that process, we, over 7 years, same as Cui Jie's experience on post-pandemic, there was no publicness or public space for the community to breathe, to enjoy. But through the kind of transformation of different stakeholders, whether it's local community, activists, artists, designers, architects, government, leaders coming together, we actually managed to transform policies in Hong Kong. So although those small little acts of intervention, it allowed us to kind of see something very different about the urgency of the public realm for the community. And so I think for kind of a question maybe back to all of you, I know you get commissioned. You have to work with very complex stakeholders. I'm sure Kulapat. And also Cui Jie, I just really admire your process where it becomes you're like an artist agent of change. And by creating that beautiful garden public space program with growing the garden, learning about nature with your community, it probably triggers a lot of change. And I would love to know what changed from these two projects for both of you. Cui Jie?
So I want to first respond to what Kulapat discussed about the relationship between art and space. So I'm a big fan of Kulapat's work, especially the museum spaces he had worked on. So I have never got experience to exhibit my work in your space that you helped created and designed. So for a museum space, for artists, you actually get a lot of inspiration from these design of the spaces themselves. So if I just look at the pictures, I would imagine that what I would do what the status of the works would present in these spaces. So my creativity and the things I want to express, and try to align in a way what kind of exchange it will have with what you're trying to express as an architect, as an artist. So artist, him or herself, exhibiting in a public space like a museum, sometimes the connection between the artist and the architect are sort of a syncretic imagination. It's not really a more direct exchange or connection. So when I heard what Kulapat has been discussing about his understanding of art, of architecture, in the future, when an artist holds a gigantic project such as the Soul Exhibition, maybe there should be some interaction between the artist and the architect who designed the space in the first place. So there might be more. It might be more enriching, more enlivening, more interesting, sort of a collisions. That's what I wanted to first respond to, what Kulapat has said.
Very much. I think, again, I was very struck by it, and I, of course, admire artists, and many of them are my good friends. And one compliment that I got from my artists, I also design studios for artists as well. Many of them are friends. And I feel like, it's, again, going back to the history of spaces for art, right? People are believing that it needs to be white cube, perfect proportion, and neutral as much as possible, with the perfect light. But what's lacking in most white cube, it doesn't have a soul. And so when you have neutrality, for neutrality's sake, it's a lifeless space that art doesn't want to live in. Good art has life too. So within that, the collaboration, as you mentioned, like what you do, you function as your own architect, right? You're bringing in the storytelling, you're bringing the space design to allow people to flow through the work, understand your thinking, because you obviously communicate it through not only the paintings on the wall, but how people should experience that in the context of the Westman Museum. The same thing with me, because when I design museums, I also thinking, okay, well, contemporary or not, like what are the encounters? What are the undeniable sense of discovery that people should have? I feel that, and a lot of times, not to name names, but, museums tend to want people to experience art the way they want them to experience art. Right, and I sometimes I call it the rob of discovery, because what we all want to do, which the great art collector Dominique Dominil mentioned before she passed. She said, "What's important to me is what I discover," and what I think we all should not rob the public from the joy of discovery, something they didn't know about, they come across. But of course, the job to us is to be able to present in a way that allow the art to really not only present themselves well, but in a moment that it can spy and encounter with the visitors, right? And we can do this in a very subtle way. Architects sometimes like to be in the picture at all times. So I sometimes joke that myself is like a matchmaker between art and people. So as a good matchmaker, you make an introduction and you fade in the background, right? You let them kind of do the magic. But most architects, as matchmaker, they're there. It's like, look at me, look at me, look at me. I'm here with you, right? So they didn't like the magic to happen without them. They don't want to be forget. So that's something that I think is important, like what we talked about. I love your idea. Many artist friends have started to have their architect collaborator, either a project by project or in-house, and they have mentioned like, oh my God, expand their way of thinking. The same thing that architect should have artists, collaborator or even house, because the conversation will bring completely different results that I felt like the world is ready for. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think the education of an architect has also changed drastically. It's not the master-mentor role. It's also this conversation and dialogue between the different disciplines. And as kind of being in Hong Kong and also in the engaging global discussion around the change of the education of an architect, it's not just the physicality of a space, but it's also communicating. How do you even learn to engage in the conversation with your client or your artist collaborator. It's interesting with our project now in Stanley, Murray House, our little micro festival. It's also an interesting test for us. This 19th century building that used to sit in the site in Central had been bought back in the 1980s heyday of Hong Kong for $120 million. Moved the building brick by brick, 3,000 bricks, over to Stanley, transforming that history as a site. It's been empty for now a year. We've had this amazing opportunity to speculate and test how different disciplines can come together. And I think the role of whether an artist or architect or designer seems to be intertwined more about agency of change. And I'm looking forward to this very clever question on how does that collectivism of different disciplines comes to create a stronger sense of community and identity building. I know we have a few minutes left. As a moderator, I always love engaging audiences. So it's not just about two of these super incredible artists and architects, but also the hybridization of, or tribadization of how technology communities have also expanded into the realm of making. So I know that was one of my urgent questions is how does technology play a role, but also how does the audience here sitting in the Convention Center Art Basel Conversation series, if anyone would like to ask one or two questions, please raise your hand. And we take a moment to just see how technology plays a role as another discipline in your work, because I'm sure your museum spaces have changed because of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Maybe I take this technology question first. Technology integration is one of the most important topics of the museum of today and the future. Right? People spend time on their phones, people thinking visually. I think that's, of course, not to mention AI and many other technology that's evolving as we speak. Museum is supposed to last forever, right? That's their mandate. They're supposed to sit there like a time capsule so people in the future can come back and say, look at those people, they have done amazing things then, right? So it is this weird sense of how can we be timeless, but also kind of look for the future. I think, big museums I work with, the Louvre and the Met are very, they're really trying to find a way to do that. And I think for me, technology doesn't take away from the art if we know how to ration it. Right, the idea, people are really living off a lot from their own technology, so we should let them be part of that too. People need to be able to check things on the phone once they see something they like. People need to be able to bring different kind of media into it, allow different kind of interpretation, and lead on other connection within the experience as well. One thing that I see technology has done is that it really empowers young people. Before that, older people are the people who tell young people what to look, right? Or tell them what they think is the truth. And then immediately the young people today was like, no, you're not wrong. Look at this. I just checked this. What you just say is not correct, right? So it empowers young people to actually have their own opinion, have their standpoint. If older people allow this to be, it create a healthy conversation, right? So the time when, the grandparents take the young grandchildren to the museum and the grandparents tell the grandchildren oh, look at what this is like. No, the grandchildren are the one who say, no, grandpa, look at this. So which I think it's really neutralize the hierarchy in a beautiful way, yeah.
Cui Jie, would you like to comment? And if we have any questions, please.
For me, the medium I have chosen, painting, it is a very ancient and long-standing medium. So I've always been curious about new medium and new technology. So I want to be able to reflect in my own work how what kind of impact a new technology has on art, and then how technology alters my way of looking. And my next research and projects will have to do with artificial islands. man-made islands, and also ways of seeing, ways of looking at how do they change the morphology of islands. So the next project is a commission project at Singapore Biennale. It's about man-made artificial islands, about the Silk Road of the sea, marine Silk Road, and its relationship with Singapore. So I went to Dubai once and saw how the Palm Island they have reclaimed from the ocean. So this is not actually done in the perspective of human. When you're on it, you don't feel that you're on an island, and you cannot see the palm tree shape that it tries to convey. And also in some cases in China, you have island that's shaped like a flower. It is taken at the perspective from the space, from technology with drones, helicopter. Or what you can see with your naked eye is from actually a lookout point. It's not really the whole picture. So that makes me think that the previously traditional Chinese islands are, for example, they are like an imaginary island. It's a mountain in the ocean. It's inhabited by transcendence. So you will be able to see it. It's kind of a human dimension. You can see the islands, the mountains from the land. So that makes me think technology and how it impacts land, how it impacts ways of thinking, how it impacts the cycle of the birth and deaths of islands. And so I hope that my following projects will see me actually discuss more in-depth technological themes. But I think my practice is still more about how technology changes my way of thinking, my way of seeing, and how it reconfigures the relationship between power and landscape.
Urban planners, when they draw a line, I mean, in Hong Kong, it's incredible. 75% of our city is actually nature, and we're all tightly squeezed in 25% of our land in compact living. That relates this intriguing concept of nature and culture and the responsibility of urbanism from a master planning viewpoint. Gets me very excited. But please, a question from the audience.
Hello. I was curious to know from architect Kulapat, at the beginning of this conversation, it was mentioned that you collaborated with Tadao Anderson. So I was wondering on which project you collaborated and how was the dialogue between the two of you, considering that his architecture is almost like a microcosm where everything is so balanced. So how was, a dialogue between the two of you?
Thank you. I was employed. I was an employee of him for 8 years, right? We were friends before, and it started in 1996 when he got a competition for a museum in Texas. And I happened to be reading a book about that museum, and so he invited me to join the competition, which is a museum of modern art in Fort Worth, Texas, across the street from the Kimball, which is considered one of the best museums in the world. And so through that project, which I worked on for 6 months, we won the competition. So I decided or invited to then continue the conversation. So what started as like a 6 months project turned into 8 years of very close relationship and collaboration. So I work on so many things. Most of the project outside Japan. So in Europe, I work on the Armani Theater in Milan. I did design for the François Pinault's museum in Paris. I work on many museums in the U.S., including the one that I worked on a competition in Texas, the Clark Arts Institute. I work on the housing. And then when I left in 2004, we started a house together in Los Angeles. I didn't move to Los Angeles to work on that house. I already working on it, but I decided to move because I feel like LA is such a good sense of freedom. And so I took that project on and worked on it for another 12 years. So we then have a different relationship. So yes, I think it's interesting because, I mean, he's maybe closer to my father's age, but we have a very friendly relationship. He's very stoic, but also as someone from Osaka, very playful. and very, engaging. And that human quality allowed me to really engage. And we have such a fun time. But at the same time, it's also a different generation. And Japan is also very rigid in the way that it thinks about what it is and what it is not, right? And grew up in Thailand, I felt like I need flexibility, I need spontaneity, I need smells, I need colors, like exactly, yes, and all of these. So I felt like my best contribution to culture is to really learn from Japan, but then find another place where the soil is good, so I can grow a new type of hybrid from the Japanese sense of aesthetic, from the Thai playfulness, from the soft power and other things, right? I learned a lot from Thai food, how Thai food bring a lot of great things from Chinese food, from Indian food, from anything, and bring, for a small little country, can bring something unique as Thai food. So if you have that ability to hybridize this kind of new creation, maybe architecture also have a chance as well. So that's how I started, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And the spirit of Ando-san is quite amazing as a boxer.
Yes.
That playfulness. And I see both of you, you're very rigorous and very serious practitioners, but you have an incredible way to bring the community together. So just want to thank you both for sharing your journey, probing this very, very important intellectual question of the future of art and design and architecture, and hybridity that maybe is not just hybrid of one meets another, but tribidity or multibridity could be our next panel. So thank you, audience, for joining us today. What an incredible day. And this is the last day of Art Basel, and I hope all of you here have enjoyed our conversation. And thank you so much for having us today.